9.5. If this was the exact same football team and they were wearing blue and they were the University of Alabama, Birmingham, this wouldn't be 9.5. Tennessee fans move the line at times because it's a heavy gambling state, but no team moves the line like Alabama. This to me feels like this should be a 6.5 point spread, not a 9.5 point spread. Caleb, you're more into the gambling scene. What do you think?
Well, let's be fair here. Let's look at last year. Tennessee was a 9-point underdog. To go from a 9-point dog at home to a 9.5 point dog on the road against Alabama shows an improved perception of Tennessee. Not to mention, just the last few times they were in Tuscaloosa, Dave, 25-point underdogs in 2021, 34.5 in 2019, 37. They were 37-point dogs in 2017. By the way, Alabama covered that 37-point spread. Butch Jones's last year, but it's so the spreads have been horrific for Tennessee and Tuscaloosa, and Alabama still managed to cover them. I think the big difference for what a lot of people are seeing, and this comes down to one thing: these teams are very similar, but the odds makers have a lot more faith. They're giving Alabama some points for being at home, and they have more faith in Jalen Milroe than Joe Milton. I mean, and let's be honest, who can blame him? Jalen Milroe looks against Texas A&M. He was significantly better throwing the ball than Joe Milton was throwing the ball.
Agreed.
And that's enough to go from 6 to 9.5, if I'm going to be honest.
So Tennessee up to number 17 in the AP poll. I usually put more weight in the AP poll, but I want to talk about the coaches poll for a second. They're number 15. Now, you and I know that sports information directors a lot of times fill out these polls, but let's take our cynicism and put it aside for a second. Let's say all the coaches are filling out the polls, which they're not, but let's say they are. They're ballots. The fact that the coaches like Tennessee more than the AP, who some do a great job of breaking down the entire world of college football and some just slot them up if they win or lose. But if coaches have more respect for Tennessee and how they're winning in a much different way, that says something to me, as opposed to writers who would look at this and some highlights and say Tennessee is struggling on offense. They're an offensive team. They can't win that way. So they're number 17. A coach would see this as something totally different, which I wonder if that's why they're higher in the coaches poll than the AP poll.
That's certainly a possibility. There's still a lot of coaches that still believe in that old school philosophy. I think a lot of AP writers, a lot of this has to do with AP writers. And to be fair, they jumped 2 spots in both polls, but they were writing off, no pun intended, a little bit Tennessee's win against Texas A&M because of the lack of faith in Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M on the road. I mean, this is a consistently, perpetually underachieving football team under Jimbo Fisher. And I think that's a big part of that.
Here's the thing you didn't get either. You got the interception from Gabe Judy Lawley. That was pressure forced. So that's in some ways a turnover based off the front seven and the way they're able to pressure A&M. But you haven't seen a strip sack yet. You haven't seen a sack that really takes somebody out of field position or where they wanted to be. I think the bigger impact plays, as good as this defense played over the weekend against Texas A&M, I think the big impact plays that can switch games are still down the road.
They are, but there's the other side to that. You haven't seen Tennessee's pass rush go against a quarterback as athletic as Jalen Milroe. And look, there were a couple of times on Saturday, and you saw it. Max Johnson scrambled out of multiple sacks and made a play. Max Johnson ain't the most mobile quarterback. So if he can do that, you do have to wonder, is Tennessee going to be able to still do what they do against a Jalen Milroe, who is, whatever else he is, he's deadly athletic. And I think they're kind of realizing that. He's a first-read guy. I've watched enough of him. He is a first-read guy, right, Dave? If his first read's not, they're coaching him. If your first read's not there, just run.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'll say this too, and these are two different teams, but Tennessee did pretty well against mobile quarterbacks last year, Caleb. It seemed like every single week they were playing a guy with mobility, be it Jaden Daniels or whomever, to start the season. We were talking about how they had to have gap integrity and be able to hem those guys in. That's the way they're coached. So my prediction is Tim Banks backs off a little bit, the stunts and twists, and plays Alabama a little bit more straight up, who's not great on the offensive line. And I think you make sure that Jalen Milroe doesn't beat you by blowing a gap protection. If you do that, you've got a great chance to win this football game. You make him beat you with his arm, not his legs. And I like Tennessee's chances not only to cover, but to win.
Do you think, though, don't you think Tim Banks might want to disguise some coverages just out of a lack of faith in Jalen Milroe to be able to read the blitzes or to be able to see them coming? Because
yeah, but that's exactly my point. I would take that linebacker who maybe I'm using in stunts and twists to provide more pressure up front, and maybe I'm dropping him back in coverage a little bit more.
And you think that'll confuse Jalen Milroe a little bit?
Yeah. So, and I think that when you look at guys like James Pierce, Omari Hand, they can
Amari
Thomas, they can get a great push without help. So I think this team, maybe not tailor-made, maybe that's a little bit too strong of a comment, but this defense is designed more so than any defense I've seen in a long time to beat this type of offense, which is, hey, this running back might run around, make some plays, gash you, keep you on the field. And if that happens, you're in trouble. But I mean, let's be frank. I mean, Tennessee now can hold on to the ball a little bit. They can run the football. So their defense is not going to be as gassed. They can play with more energy throughout the game. They're not playing 80 plays a game. They're still running tempo, but it's not the tempo like last year on offense. So that means the defense is fresher.
Dave, you're saying something wild as we're talking about this out loud, and I can't believe we're saying this. You're saying, like, last year Tennessee beat Alabama because we had faith in Josh Heupel's offensive scheme and the system, and that is how they won. You're saying this year for Tennessee, it's not necessarily the X's and O's that could beat Alabama. It's actually the Jimmies and Joes. When has Tennessee beaten Alabama? When is the last time Tennessee beat Alabama with Jimmies and Joes and not X's and O's? Because you're basically suggesting that Tennessee can beat Alabama because of the War Daddies up front. I can't remember Tennessee ever being in that position in recent years.
It's pre-Saban. I mean, there's no question about it.
It's definitely pre-Saban. Maybe 2007 when Alabama blew them out because Saban just put it on a coaching masterpiece that you and Josh were talking about last week, that game in Tuscaloosa. But yeah, what we're saying here, this is so crazy to say out loud, but we're saying Tennessee can't throw the ball, but they can win in the trenches. And that's going to be enough for them to beat Alabama. Not only Tennessee, when's the last time you said that about Alabama, period? Maybe, I mean, outside of when they maybe faced Georgia in the national title game 2 years ago, I don't think it's ever been said about Alabama since Saban's dynasty started.
Let me break it down like this. Who do you think's the most talented Jimmy's and Joe's team in the nation right now?
Pure talent. It's y'all are going to disagree with me, but it's going to be it's Ohio State, and I'm just basing that off NFL draft picks for next year.
Okay. I like their quarterback a little bit more, so I would say Georgia, but tit for tat. I mean, we could argue that. So whichever of those programs, let's say that they're a 10. Okay, so what's Alabama on a talent scale 1 to 10? 1 being Butch Jones has been doing your recruiting, 10 being Nick Saban's been doing your recruiting.
They're still a 9 pushing a 10 for me, and it's only because of the quarterback, because I've seen I know I'm a slave to the recruiting rankings, but they put together a historically great classes. I think they're close to 10. They're just raw.
Okay, I got no problem with that. But what's Tennessee? That's the kicker question.
7, maybe?
That's comparable. In year 3, that's comparable.
That is true. You're right.
You can take your transfer portal and all that you want, but you talk about player development and what Cooper Mays has turned into, what you talk about recruiting, the guys they've gotten in James Pierce and Arian Carter is still going to be a star from what I hear. Don't worry about that. You take player development, you take recruiting. We're talking about a comparable roster. And who in 2001, when Josh Heupel was hired in January, I guess, of that year, would have ever thought we'd be having that conversation in 2003? I'm sorry, 2023.
Yeah, I don't think anybody did. And I think that this is the biggest testament, though. I want to say this. The first 2 years are a big testament to Josh Heupel's scheme. This year is a testament not to Josh Heupel's recruiting, to Rodney Garner's recruiting. This guy scouts talent. I've criticized Josh Heupel's talent evaluation. Man, Rodney Garner is a heck of a talent evaluator, though. I mean, to find James Pierce, Tyler Bama was already there, but to find a guy like James Pierce, I'm sure Tim Banks had a hand in Arian Carter. The defensive coaching staff is superb at scouting talent. They're Jeremy Pruitt level.
Well, don't forget this. I'm not crazy about his defensive backs coaching, but Willie Martinez deserves some credit for the talent upgrade as well.
He does. Getting Wesley Walker in there has been huge for Tennessee. And, you still have, I can't remember if Kamal hadn't transferred. It was like right after or right before Josh Heupel was hired. I can't actually remember. I think Kevin Steele might have actually gotten Kamal Hadden to transfer to Tennessee. I could be wrong on that, though. But it was right around that time. But, yeah, I think that the scouting has been amazing for Tennessee's defensive staff. Still questions on the offensive staff, but that's where this Alabama situation comes into play, which is incredible.
Smoky Mountain Red says, pay Rodney whatever it takes to make him retire here. That's absolutely right. If he ends up going to another SEC school for whatever reason, then you have failed as an administration. I mean,
it's funny. So the last time Rodney was at Tennessee was like 95 to 97, right? During that time, 98.
Yes.
I thought about this recently. In 2003, Tennessee had 5 defensive linemen who were Pro Bowlers who all played during the time that Rodney Garner recruited them. John Henderson, Albert Hainsworth, Leonard Little, Sean Ellis, and Darwin Walker. All in the 97 to 99 range that Rodney Garner helped bring in. And, that's incredible. That's a run.